everybody, Amy here checking in for week 5 with my updates. I cannot believe it, but we are actually halfway through the semester after this week. So I've got some midterm related things for your student success work that Deb is asking you to do for this week. But I'm going to start by looking backward at the narrative essay. I know we turned these in already and it seems like we've moved on, but I do want to talk a little bit about the grading because I got those grades posted and sent you your feedback since I last checked in with you. So I'm just going to go here to the rubric for the narrative essay, which you can always find on the assignment sheet, of course. And I want to just talk a little bit about what I saw in terms of these elements that you were being graded on. The reflection that you did, your ability to formulate a SMART goal, organize the essay according to main idea and subpoints, and how well it followed the conventions of English usage and MLA format. These were the things that I was trying to comment on as I wrote your paragraphs in the commentary section of the Dropbox. So for each of you, I wrote just a little summary and attached this rubric. So you should see a correspondence between the things I talked about in your summary and the different categories here. So based on wherever I thought you were falling in terms of these descriptions, I then averaged things out to your grades. So, and I think I've mentioned in a previous screencast video that the things on the left-hand side in terms of these categories are going to be a little more heavily weighted than the right-hand side. So the most important things are over here, and I'm weighing your ability to execute conventions and grammar and MLA and that kind of thing a little bit less. So, the most important things for your grade were your ability to think deeply about your own experiences with education and formulate a SMART goal for your future time at FRCC. And I was asking you to focus just on FRCC in terms of scope, because if you go too far beyond that, you're getting into a really long-term goal, and it's actually been proven that super long-term goals are less attainable than short-term goals, or the more focused your goals are in terms of the time span, the more likely you are to actually successfully achieve those goals. So I wanted you to be thinking deeply, but I also wanted you to come up with something new for your future. So kind of reflecting on the past, looking toward the future. Then the SMART goal itself constituted the main idea, and those subpoints for how you were going to attain it were the focus or foci of your body paragraph. So those would have been the subpoints if you're looking at this from the framework of any traditional essay. So I do want to say that I was looking for that kind of 5 or 6 paragraph structure where you have an intro, conclusion, and body paragraphs that develop subpoints that are related to the overall main idea. And that's important because when you get to a class like English 121 next semester, you're going to be asked to do things that kind of build on that. So you're expected to already know how to formulate an essay according to that framework. So it may seem like that's really boring or that's the most basic way to write. Oh, I already know how to do this type of essay. But we're just asking you to document that here and prove that you know how to do it so that when you get to a class like English 121, it's easier for you to branch out. I always use the metaphor of Picasso. So Picasso was a very abstract cubist painter, actually, but he also knew how to draw a very realistic portrait of a human being that would look, you know, just like a photograph. And so he could do that kind of stuff when he was 5 years old. And he actually has a famous quote where he said, you know, it took me decades to unlearn how to do that, and that was his life's work. So I would say you first have to understand how to do things in the traditional way and make it look like it's supposed to look, and then once you've got that down, then you can practice kind of working backward and breaking it down or going beyond that or going further than that. And so we're going to expect you to build on these skills when you get to English 121, and we just want to establish that you actually are able to organize your essays that way here. So I also want to talk a little bit about the SMART goals themselves. So it may seem like, you know, kind of silly that you were asked to come up with a statement that met these particular criteria. However, there's a lot of research that shows that when you come up with a goal that follows these categories, you're actually much more likely to succeed. So as long as your goal is specific, you are much more likely to succeed. You know, saying I want to get my AA or saying I want to earn 20 credits before I transfer is a lot more attainable than actually saying, or I should say realistic, than saying something like I want to do a good job. Because doing doing a good job is kind of vague. It's not specific. It's also not measurable, which is the second criteria here. You can't measure doing a good job. You can definitely measure 20 credits in your line of study or something like that. Attainable just means that it's within your reach. Like, I'm not going to go out there and say that I want to be the star of the next blockbuster film when I'm just starting out my interest in acting as a hobby. So make sure it's something that's actually within the scope of what you're working toward at this point in your life. So that's also why I was asking you to come up with a goal that was focused on your time here at Front Range. And then relevant, that's where I think a lot of you were trying to say things, you know, like I want to go on and get my master's, or I want to go on and get my bachelor's. And that's great. It seems like a lot of you are traditional students in the sense that you do want to transfer to a university. I didn't hear a lot of people here saying, I just want to take a credit or two to improve my career, or this applies to my work, or my work is sending me back to school. It seems like most of you are pretty interested in furthering your education beyond your time here at FRCC, and that's what makes your goal relevant. That's kind of the why. It keeps you motivated in those moments when you're like, this sucks, I don't want to do this anymore, what is the point? The relevancy statement is what can keep you going, because then you can say, well, I know I'm going to need this when I get to CSU, or I'm going to need this when I go to work, or whatever. And then the time thing, that's just another statistically proven. There's a lot of research to support this, that if you set a time frame for your goal, you are bounds and bounds more likely to actually achieve that goal. So that's why I wanted you to follow this somewhat prescriptive set of criteria. I know it seems like somewhat arbitrary perhaps, but I will say that there is a lot of research to support this, and it's something you're going to see across the corporate world, across the field of academics that you're in. It's going to come up again and again and again. So if you've heard of it, at least you'll know what to expect. And then the convention stuff, I would say that overall, I think you're in pretty good shape as a whole class compared to other CCR 092 classes that I've taught. I don't know if that's because it's a summer session or whatever, but I just want to remind you all that you should be applying the grammar lessons that we're doing on a weekly basis to the essays that you're writing, especially your polished work. I'm not always looking for this, like especially if you have, say, a journal where I'm telling you to do a free write. I'm not going to be looking to see that you're making sure you're using semicolons correctly. But when it comes to your formal essay work, I do want to see you polish that and apply the skills that we've been developing, because I did see a lot of things with like fragments and run-ons, and I know that's something we've just started to introduce in the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to look on your summary and response essays for there to be some improvement in that area. But the biggest thing I kind of want to emphasize here talking about the narrative essay is that this grading process that I engage with all of you is just a starting point. I really don't intend for it to be the end of the conversation. In fact, I want it to be a jumping off point. I've communicated with almost all of you via email at this point, and I hope you all feel comfortable communicating with me that way. But I'll say, if you have questions about anything I wrote in your summary, or if you have questions about this rubric, or if you're like, well, I saw what you highlighted on here, but I don't know how you got to this number at the top, just let me know. Like, I have graded this way for a long time, and I know what the student experience seems to be like from the feedback I've gotten so far, which has been really helpful. So I encourage all of you to continue that and keep giving me feedback. And if you have questions, I certainly welcome the opportunity to talk to any of you about your writing at any time. So please don't hesitate, and feel free to reach out if you have questions or concerns about any of that. Okay, so going back to week 4, also want to take a look at your quiz, the fragments and run-ons quiz, because this was actually, unfortunately, one of our lower scoring quizzes. In fact, our worst quiz of the semester. You guys have been doing really, really well on the quizzes, but in fact, this one was not with that trend. Unfortunately, I'm not sure why. Hang on, it just takes me a little bit longer to get to these sometimes because I have to go out of my student view. Okay, so you'll see here that our class average was actually a 78.18%, so by far our lowest quiz. I think it's probably the only quiz that the average has been a C plus at that, but still a C. You can see there were only three, I think, questions that you all got at least a B percentage on, which usually, if you remember, it's almost all the questions have at least an 80% success rate. So here I'm just going to go over the questions that did not have a passing success rate. So if, less than 60% of you got the question right, it seems like there's probably some misunderstanding going on. So I'm going to focus on these questions. Question 3 was one of them. This was asking you to revise something, or in fact choose the best option for revising a sentence. So okay, I take that back. Sorry, I'm getting this confused. Which set of these sentences is correct? So it's basically different options for how you could write the sentence, and you're to choose which one is grammatically appropriate. So we have one here that is two sentences. I won't call them complete sentences because this is not the correct answer. Disappointed with my grade on the first test, period. I almost dropped the class. So this is not the right answer because the first part is not a complete sentence. There should not be a period here. This doesn't work because there is no verb. Do you see this? Disappointed is an adjective, with is a preposition, my is a possessive pronoun, grade is a noun, on is a preposition, the is an article, first is an adjective, test is a noun. There's no verb. So this cannot be a complete sentence. A is not correct. B, I almost dropped the class from being disappointed with my grade on the first test. This also does not have a verb, but really the issue here is that it's a prepositional phrase. I've told you before, prepositional phrases are never complete sentences, so until there's a punctuation mark, it's a prepositional phrase. From being disappointed with my grade on the first test, it's actually a series of prepositional phrases. So this is not a complete sentence. B is not correct. Here, we have disappointed, comma. I stared at my grade on the first test, period. I considered dropping the class. So disappointed, that's just an interjection. It's some extra information in the sentence, and we don't really need to worry about it because it's set off with a punctuation mark, in this case a comma. I stared at my grade. So we have subject, verb, and then prepositional phrase, prepositional phrase. Subject, verb, dropping the class. And I'll come back to these ing words in just a second. Both of these are complete sentences, so we know that C is going to be a correct option. We'll take a look at D just to be sure. Being disappointed with my grade on the first test, period, I considered dropping the class. So we remember from C that the second half here is in fact a complete sentence. We have a subject and a verb, a true verb here. Remember, start with the verb. Here, on the first part, we have being disappointed with my grade on the first test. So remember from these examples that with my grade is a prepositional phrase, on the first test is a prepositional phrase, so those aren't going to work to make this a complete sentence. We need to look for somewhere else where we could find a subject and a verb. All we have is being disappointed. Disappointed is an adjective. It describes a person's feelings, okay? Being, you might think, is a verb because to be is a verb. It's in fact one of the most common verbs in the English language. However, because it ends in ing, it is actually what we call a gerund, which is a noun form of a verb. You see these all the time. Running, swimming, jumping, hopping, leaping. These are all gerund forms of verbs. It's G-E-R-U-N-D. Probably, again, more grammar information than you ever wanted to know. But because it has an ing, just memorize. It's actually a noun. Okay? Seems weird, but I'm telling you this. So it is not a verb. There is no verb in this part of the sentence. It's not really a complete sentence. It's incorrect. So we're going to go back and we know it's got to be C there. Okay, that was just the first one. Next one, question 6. This is actually a semicolons question, so if you're trying to practice with those semicolons, look at question 6. Choose the most appropriate option for revising. So an actor has to pretend to be many different people. It is a hard job calling for a lot of training. So the first thing we need to see excuse me, is that this is a run-on sentence because there's verb after verb, okay? Multiple verbs, no punctuation. There's a problem here right from the start. So we're not going to say A. That's wrong. An actor has to pretend to be many different people, comma, it is a hard job calling for a lot of training. So this is what I would ask you. Is this comma enough to hold back, or excuse me, hold together the two clauses on either side, both of which have an active verb? An actor has to pretend, and it is a hard job. Okay? So you have subject, verb, two complete sentences on either side. Is a comma by itself enough to hold together two complete sentences? No. You either need a comma and a coordinating conjunction, like and, or, but, because, or you need to replace the comma with a semicolon. This is what we call a comma splice. So C is the correct answer here. The next one that was a pretty low scoring option was question 9. Only 55% of you got this one right. This one is also asking you to choose the most appropriate option for revising. We're looking at a sentence here. To simplify the billing process, that's a prepositional phrase. It's set off with a comma, so we know this is fine. We can just forget about that. We bill, noun, verb, on the first, that's a prepositional phrase, of each month, that's a prepositional phrase. Then we interact with another punctuation mark, but there's a coordinating conjunction right afterwards. Bills will be overdue. Subject, verb, on the 15th, that is a prepositional phrase. Of each month, that's a prepositional phrase. So you can just throw out all those prepositional phrases because there is a comma to mark off the one at the beginning. You don't need prepositional phrases marked off with commas if they occur at the end of the sentence. That's just another thing you can memorize. But we have subject, verb, prep phrase, comma, coordinating conjunction, subject, verb, okay? So is a comma and a coordinating conjunction enough to hold together two complete sentences on either side? Yes, it is. So this sentence is actually correct. You could replace the comma and coordinating conjunction and with a semicolon instead, like we saw in the last example, but this is plenty. All right, and question 10, the last one here, is asking you again to make the choice of which option is most appropriate, which is a very common grammar thing. You might think there's right answers in grammar, but usually it's a matter of choosing the most appropriate option. Packing for the trip to Mexico, comma, and trying to get all of his business affairs in order, comma, Kyle knew he would be exhausted when he finally arrived at his destination. So we have a couple of prepositional phrases at the end of the sentence. We can just throw those out. Then we have a subject and a verb. Kyle knew he would be, which is just kind of a passive verb construction with the helping verb there, but it's still a subject and a verb. Set off with a comma. That is all correct. We're kind of working backwards here. But in the first part of the sentence, we have packing for the trip to Mexico. I already told you that ing words are not verbs, so this is not a complete sentence. It's a dependent clause, but it's set off with a comma, so that's okay. As long as it's not a complete sentence, the comma is enough to hold it together. Plus, we have a coordinating conjunction here. So that makes me think this is really just a list of two things. And that tells me that we actually only need a comma if the list is of a series of 3 or more. So since we are just joining two things here at the beginning of the sentence, packing and trying to get all his affairs in order, this comma does not need to be there. We do need this comma because it's connecting this part of the sentence, which does not really have a verb, to our independent clause, subject, verb here. So remember, a dependent clause can be connected to an independent clause with a comma. Comma is just not strong enough to hold two independent clauses together. So since this is just a list of two things at the beginning of the sentence, we should eliminate this comma. If it were a list of three, you would need commas in between all three items, but it's not, so we're going to go with option B here. Okay, so just slow down and rewind and watch this again if that was way too much information about grammar for you in the last 7 minutes or so. Okay, so that brings me to where we are now, which is working on our summary and response essays. So some of the stuff that I want to touch base with you guys on came up in your week 4 discussion. It was really just some of the stuff that you said in your reflections. Specifically, Leslie was talking about the 5 parts of the essay, and I thought she said it really well. So I just wanted to point it all out to you if you haven't gone back and checked. So Leslie says here, I think in my future summary response essay, I should also pay attention to how to show my interest in discussing issues of the article thoughtfully, and I should try to develop my body paragraphs not only from my life, but also from our culture. I think it might be challenging for me. Besides, the final reflection provides me with an opportunity to reflect back on the ideas I developed this week. After reading the summary response essay sample, I have a clear understanding of the structure of the summary response essay. Generally speaking, a summary and response essay includes 5 parts: an introduction, which gives an overview of the topic at hand, a summary, which contains all the basic information of the essay, a clear thesis, which explicitly states whether I agree or disagree with the author, response body paragraphs, which provide support for my thesis, and a conclusion, which restates what I said in the paper. Okay, this is what I've developed this week. So this is all right on. If any of you are having questions about how this essay should be written or what you need to include, come back and review this post, because especially the breakdown here of the 5 parts of the essay is exactly correct. And then if you really are still looking for ideas, you can go back to the sample essay and compare the list that Leslie has there to the student sample essay, because you'll see I've got it kind of pointed out for you. So you have your introduction, that's what Leslie was talking about for part 1, then you have your summary, then you have your thesis statement with 3 points or so. Those points are built into the topic sentences for the response paragraphs of the body of the response. Those are talking about whether you agree or disagree with the ideas in the article. Again, they're presented in topic sentences. And then in the conclusion, you restate probably the writer's thesis, but then also your own thesis with your agree and disagree points there. And then don't forget, you need to have a works cited at the end for this one, because we are dealing with another writer's work. You want to provide credit to that writer for their ideas so that you can avoid plagiarism. I also wanted to show you a little bit more about those points of agreement and disagreement that came up in Jessica's thread, both in her replies but also in her final end of week reflection, which I'll go to in just a second. So here she's talking about the different agree and disagree points that she would pull into her response portion of the essay. So she said, for part 2, I really agreed with just about the whole article. I truly feel like what we put out into the universe is what we get back. I interpreted this basically as him saying that how we perceive ourselves is what we get out of ourselves. So she's really elaborating here, not just repeating what Dweck has said. Dweck is actually a she, just so you know, but adding things from her own personal experience that go beyond just summary. So this was something I touched on in my last video, is that when you're agreeing with the writer, you need to be really careful that you're not just repeating what they've said, because then you're likely to accidentally plagiarize by not giving them credit, because you're just kind of repeating it as if it's your own. But then she's talking a little bit more down here, you know, that she says what I did not agree with is when he said that his teacher in grade school had children with a high IQ, held them to a higher standard than others. I don't think that was fair of his teacher to do. I don't think that people should judge others based on their intelligence or lack thereof. So I just want to clarify, Jessica, you're not disagreeing with Dweck there, because Dweck is saying that that was bad too. You're disagreeing with what the teacher did, but Dweck disagrees with what the teacher did too. So you're actually agreeing with Dweck in that case. So as far as agree and disagree points, I don't know that this one would qualify as a true disagree point. But I still think that there's other things to consider. I mean, things that have come up in the discussions we've had in the last couple of weeks already, like how can you narrow this down to just two mindsets? What about other personalities, or what about other ways of looking at the world, and that kind of thing. So, and it's fine to have mostly agree or mostly disagree points in your summary response essay. Not all of your points have to be to one side or the other, but you are going to have to generally decide, if overall you agree or disagree. So that's okay for you to have points that are mostly to one side or the other. Okay. I also wanted to show you how this came up in Jessica's actual reflection. One thing I will say is, Jessica, I really appreciate how you posted a separate paragraph for your reflection, but next time do this as a reply to your own original thread, because it's a lot easier to find these final reflections if they're within your thread as I'm grading. So I saw there were several of you who came back and started a new thread for your final reflection at the end of the week, but instead you can just go into your own thread and create a new reply to yourself, not to one of the people who commented on you. But then she says here, I was able to really get an understanding of how to write these essays. I now know how to write a reflection of what I read or heard without being too hard on my opinion. I really enjoyed reading Dweck's The Two Mindsets. It was an eye-opener to see that there are actually two types of mindsets. I never thought about that. The text was very well written. It was kind of hard for me to find the thesis, but I still enjoyed the article. I've read the text twice in search of the thesis. Hopefully I'll find it, because I think I could better understand it even more. So I think we talked about this a little bit in my last video, but I do want to point out that there's two parts to the thesis statements for most of these articles. It's kind of ideas intersecting there. And any thesis statement needs to be comprehensive of everything that's included in the text, so you want to make sure that you're not missing one of those parts. So for Dweck, it's the idea that the way you think about yourself affects your life. So that is kind of the most basic part of this. Even if she had come up with the mindsets, they really wouldn't matter if it wasn't something that could actually affect your life. So the first thing she says is that the view you adopt for yourself profoundly affects your life, and that comes up in the first paragraph or so. And then she's saying, with that in mind, there's two ways of looking at your life. One is fixed and one is more growth-minded, and the growth mindset is more likely to help you succeed. So now I'm kind of thinking maybe there's three parts here. Your thoughts about yourself in the first place have an impact. There's fixed versus growth, and third, growth is going to help you be more successful. So if you're curious about what that thesis is, I just wanted to clarify. And if you have any further questions about any of that, a comprehension of that article, just let me know. And then I also wanted to show on the assignment sheet itself, whoops, if I can go back here, where we are in terms of these stages. So you're writing your summaries today, or excuse me, this week for the discussion. You should have turned them in last night, not today. So we're really technically, in terms of these steps, just here on step 2, where you're reading closely for understanding, trying to identify the writer's thesis and key points while remaining objective. However, you may be doing some of this reading critically in your annotating. So as you're annotating, you might be making notes of things that are close comprehension of the article and what the writer says and how well you can understand it or understand it better. And then also making note of things that are your critical reactions, questions you have, things you're like, that's BS, I doubt that, that doesn't match up with my life experience, or yes, I agree, that does match up with my life experience. I've told several of you in your annotations to try to separate those things. So maybe you could color code them, or even have separate colors for agree and disagree points and that kind of thing. So that's really a step 2 phase, but we're also blending into step 3 here, because as you're getting into this week's discussion, you are summarizing the article. So that is definitely part of step 3, and I definitely intend, if you're writing about the same article that you're going to end up using for your essay, that you could lift that summary with revisions directly into your paper. So we'll move on to this response stuff next week, but in general, you are getting to kind of a blend between steps 2 and step 3. Steps 4 and 5 are definitely focused more on the response portion of the essay, so we won't get to that until next week. But there are some strategies that you could go ahead and be using to start to write your paper. You could go ahead and write your intro, definitely, and you are working on your summary right now. So even if you're writing about the Dweck article, you could go ahead and on your own start writing that summary, even though this week's discussion is focusing on the Duckworth article. But if you have any further questions about the essay that we're working on at this point, just let me know. And so that brings me to our current discussion, which is the week 5 discussion. It is your actual summary writing. And again, this is focusing on the Duckworth essay, which you may or may not end up using for your actual essay. If you want to use the Dweck article, that's fine. I would just suggest, you're going to have to go back and write a summary of that article as well. And there's just a few things I want to touch on here. I think overall your summaries were really good. Usually I see a lot of people giving all kinds of details from the article, and that's one of the biggest things I have to correct. But you guys, for the most part, across the board, did a good job focusing on main ideas instead of the specific examples and evidence that the writer's using. That's really one way to remain concise, because if you had every specific example included in your summary would end up being just as long as the original article, and so it wouldn't be shortened at all, and that's kind of the point of summary, of course. So the very first thing that you need to do in your summary is introduce the article, and it does actually need to include the author's name, the article title in quotations, the publication title in italics, and the date when it was published. So Megan did a good job getting all that information in there. I would just say that this part, since it's the title, needs to go in quotation marks, and this part, since it's the publication, where it was published, needs to go in italics. Some of you were missing just one or the other thing, but this does a good example. It shows a good example of how you can get all of that information into one sentence. You probably just need another comma or two, but I think Megan does a good job leading from there right into a comprehensive paraphrase of the author's thesis, which is definitely the next thing that you would need to include. I also want to point out that you might be tempted to say something about the writer's purpose at that point, and that is a totally normal thing to do in a summary, but just be clear that these writers are all persuasive in their goals. So they are definitely trying to persuade you. Even if it seems like they're giving you information or there might be informative elements to their writing, the primary goal is to influence your thinking about that information in one way or another, to help you come to a conclusion about that information based on their rhetorical influences. So here Leslie says, Angela Lee Duckworth's article, The Key to Success Grit, published in 2013, informs the readers about the importance of grit. So, this is all really accurate in terms of paraphrasing the writer's thesis. The only thing she's missing is the publication title in italics. But the idea that she's just informing the readers about this is not accurate. She's actually presenting this as a thesis of her own and trying to persuade you to agree with it. It's not something that is just a fact that she's giving you. So watch out for that. If you are going to present something about the writer's thesis there, make sure that you are focusing on it as a persuasive goal. But other than that, I do want to say, if any of you want to look at an example of the author tags and how you should be working the author's name into every single sentence of your summary, Leslie's summary here is an excellent example of that, and I would encourage all of you to look at that. I think for this particular article, if you're wondering about the thesis, Kendall's has a good definition of what she's saying grit is. We saw a couple good examples already with Megan and Leslie's summaries, but here oh, I'm sorry. Kendall was one that I thought could have been more specific, Kendall, and I put this in your comment. So we saw those two examples a second ago, but Kendall here says the key to success grit follows writer Angela Duckworth's journey to prove the key to success is a characteristic, not your IQ or privilege. And so I think this here is very important. I was talking about the 3 parts of Dweck's thesis. I think that holds true for Duckworth as well. And one thing you're going to have in there is this idea about the key to success, especially as Leslie said a second ago, academic or professional success. So that has to be in there. There has to be the idea that it's not IQ or talent or good looks or privilege, but then what is it exactly? And so Kendall, you're just calling it a characteristic. I think you need to be more specific there. So that's what I was trying to say in my comment. Just give us a little bit closer of a definition of what grit actually is according to Duckworth. And I think Megan is the one that I'm confusing you with, that does a good job explaining what grit is. No, sorry. It's, I mean, Megan, you have a good job, do a good job paraphrasing the thesis overall, but I'm getting, these are all kind of running together. Maybe it was Jessica's. I'm just looking off the top of my head now. Grit is passion this one is another good example because the definition of grit here needs to be in quotation marks. So Jessica, this is totally accurate. I'm really glad you have it in here, but the words passion and perseverance for long-term goals do come directly from the article. So that's something you would just want to put in quotes. But otherwise, this is something that you would definitely want to have in there in your thesis if you are going by that comprehensive idea that you're going to have all of the parts of the article in the thesis. And then for Jessica here, I would just say this should be moved up. So there were several of you who were kind of following along with the article chronologically. I know Jonathan was another one that I commented on doing this, starting with, you know, what's in the beginning of the article, what's in the middle, and then coming to this idea of grit. In terms of getting the ideas across in the most concise way, you need to get to the punchline much more quickly. Also, because the thesis is the most important thing in the article, it deserves to be in a forefront position. So move it right up to the beginning so it's paramount. Otherwise, I think this does a good job, Jessica. And then I also wanted to point out that you guys mostly did a really good job remaining objective. So I've talked a lot about that as an important criteria and the difference between your close and critical reading. The only one that I think was maybe struggling a little bit with that was Bethany. Bethany, you say here, her mix of storytelling and research enraptures you to want to know more. That sounds to me a little bit evaluative. It sounds to me more like you're saying how it is written or how engaging it is or how effective it is, and that borders on evaluation, so it's kind of violating that objectivity a little bit. You also want to avoid these kind of first and second person pronouns like you. I saw several people doing that overall. Okay, but otherwise, as I said in the beginning, you're for the most part doing a really good job focusing on main ideas and not specific details. Jessica, yours was one that I thought did a really good job with that as well. I mentioned the quote thing here, however. And then I also showed that Leslie was doing a really good job with author tags. Another person that was doing a good job with author tags is Gray. Gray has really strong author tags here, basically every single sentence in the beginning. But by the second half, we get more pronouns like the author, she, down here it's she explains, etc., etc. And since it's a summary, you really need to be giving credit to every single idea that comes from the author directly. And a pronoun isn't always enough, especially in this case because we bring in Dweck. It's unclear which she some of these later sentences are referring to. So I would say instead of the author, instead of she, try to just say the author's name, Duckworth, Dweck, as often as you can. We do refer to authors by last name. And then if you're looking for variety, vary up your verbs like argues, states, proclaims, explains, that kind of thing. And then you can vary where the author tag falls within the sentence, beginning, middle, end of the sentence, if you're just looking for a little more variety. I know those can feel monotonous, but they're really, really important for, again, giving the author credit and avoiding plagiarism. So that just brings me to the homework. I know this has been a really long video, but we're doing a lot here. You do need to do your comments to one another on the discussion today or tomorrow. For the midnight on Friday deadline, and then your reflections at the end of the week. There's some suggestions in that discussion for what you can talk about in your comments and reflections. Those reflections are due Sunday night at midnight. Your week 4 journal kind of builds on that summary stuff by giving you information about quoting and paraphrasing, and asks you to do some work there. That kind of bleeds into your grammar work for this week, which is on MLA and text citations and works cited pages. And then your student success goes back. You don't have to read any new information, but all the materials on annotating are there. Let's see, I'm trying to find this. Oh, up here. How to annotate a text, and then you do need to annotate the Duckworth article just like you did with Dweck last week and turn that into the Dropbox for Deb. She'll give you some feedback there on what it was like for you this time. And then we've got an activity that is related to the midterm. It kind of asks you to look at where your grade is at now and what you've done so far this semester well and what you want to continue doing or do differently in the second half of the semester. So there's a Dropbox for that too. Don't forget to do that assignment because it's pretty much 10 easy points if you do it like always. All right, so if you have any questions about the weekend homework assignments, just let me know. But otherwise, I'm really excited to finish up this week's discussion and move into next week when we get to focus more on response. So just let me know if you need anything. Thanks.